Picture this, November 10th, 1444. 20,000 Crusaders stand frozen on a Bulgarian plateau, watching their king, a 20-year-old boy, charge headlong into 70,000 Ottoman warriors. This isn't romanticized medieval valor. This is the catastrophic moment when Christian Europe's last great crusade died in a single blood-soaked afternoon. The Battle of Varna would decide whether the Ottoman tide sweeping across the Balkans could be stopped, or whether Constantinople, the jewel of Christendom, would stand alone against an empire that would soon dominate 3 continents. What you're about to witness is how one reckless decision destroyed a kingdom. The year 1444 marked a critical juncture in the centuries-long struggle between Christian Europe and the expanding Ottoman Empire. For over a century, the Ottomans had steadily consumed Byzantine territories, transforming from a minor Anatolian beylik into a transcontinental superpower. By the 1440s, Constantinople itself was an isolated Christian island in an Ottoman sea, its massive Theodosian walls the only barrier between Sultan Murad II and complete domination of the Balkans. But in 1443, something remarkable happened. A Hungarian general named János Hunyadi, the White Knight of Wallachia, achieved what many thought impossible. Leading a mixed force of Hungarians, Wallachians, and Serbs, Hunyadi defeated Ottoman armies in a series of stunning victories during what became known as the Long Campaign. These triumphs electrified Christian Europe. Pope Eugene IV immediately proclaimed a new crusade, and suddenly, the seemingly unstoppable Ottoman advance appeared vulnerable. The Treaty of Szeged, signed in August 1444, should have ended the conflict. Sultan Murad II, exhausted from internal rebellions and Hunyadi's relentless campaigns, agreed to a 10-year truce. In an unprecedented move, he even abdicated his throne to his 12-year-old son Mehmed, retreating to a life of contemplation in Manisa. The Sultan was done with war. But European ambitions were not done with him. King Władysław III of Poland and Hungary, crowned ruler of 2 kingdoms at age 10, now barely 20, faced immense pressure from papal legate Cardinal Julian Cesarini. The cardinal argued that oaths made to infidels were not binding in the eyes of God. With Murad retired and the Ottoman state in apparent disarray, the opportunity seemed heaven-sent. A decisive strike could shatter Ottoman power permanently, liberate the Balkans, and save Constantinople from inevitable conquest. Władysław, young and hungry for glory, was convinced. János Hunyadi, the hardened military genius who understood Ottoman warfare better than any European commander, was far more skeptical. He warned that breaking a sworn treaty would be disastrous, both morally and strategically. But he was a soldier, not a king. When Władysław decided to march, Hunyadi marched with him. In September 1444, the Crusader army departed from Hungary, moving southeast toward the Black Sea coast. Their objective, the strategic port city of Varna, where they would rendezvous with a Venetian fleet and launch a coordinated assault on Ottoman territories. The force numbered approximately 20,000 men, Polish and Hungarian knights, Wallachian cavalry, Bohemian mercenaries, and a contingent of papal troops. Against a fragmented Ottoman state led by a child sultan, these numbers seemed sufficient. What they didn't know was that their treaty violation had accomplished something no military force could. It brought Murad II out of retirement. The old sultan, furious at this betrayal, reassumed command and began force marching an army of 60 to 70,000 veteran troops toward Varna. The stage was set for annihilation. By early November, the Crusader army reached Varna, exhausted from a grueling 2-month march through hostile territory. The Venetian fleet they were counting on had been delayed by storms and Ottoman naval interdiction. Worse still, scouts brought devastating news. Sultan Murad II himself was approaching with an army that outnumbered them more than 3 to 1. The Crusader leadership faced an agonizing choice. Retreat westward meant abandoning the campaign and admitting strategic failure, but it might preserve the army. Standing and fighting meant risking everything on a single battle against overwhelming odds. János Hunyadi advocated for defensive tactics, using the limited terrain advantages and their heavily armored Western knights to blunt Ottoman charges while seeking an opportunity to withdraw. Cardinal Cesarini, invested in justifying the treaty violation, pushed for aggressive action that would demonstrate divine favor. King Władysław, caught between military pragmatism and religious fervor, chose to fight. The Crusader force established defensive positions on a plateau west of Varna, with their flanks anchored by marshland to the south. and forested hills to the north. This compressed battlefield negated some of Murad's numerical advantage. The Crusader battle line stretched approximately 2,000 meters, organized in the traditional medieval fashion. Heavily armored Polish and Hungarian knights formed the center, the most prestigious and powerful position. Hunyadi commanded the right wing with his feared Wallachian cavalry and Hungarian hussars, light, mobile forces designed for flanking maneuvers. The left wing consisted of a mixed force of Bohemian infantry and lesser nobility under various commanders. Facing them, the Ottoman army deployed in their characteristically sophisticated formation. Murad positioned his legendary Janissary Corps, elite slave soldiers renowned for their discipline and gunpowder weapons, at the center, protected by wagon fortifications and supported by artillery. These were not the disorganized tribal warriors of earlier eras. The Janissaries represented one of the world's first professional standing armies, drilled in coordinated volley fire and close-quarters combat. The Ottoman wings consisted of Anatolian Sipahi cavalry, armored horse archers who could pepper enemies with arrows before closing with sword and mace. Behind the main line, Murad held his personal guard and a massive reserve of irregular troops from across his empire. The tactical equation was brutal. The Crusaders possessed superior heavy cavalry that could potentially break through Ottoman lines in a concentrated charge. Their Polish knights wore full-plate armor that could deflect arrows and survive initial volleys of early firearms. But they were outnumbered, deep in enemy territory, and facing an army commanded by one of the era's most experienced military minds. Murad's strategy was methodical. He didn't need to destroy the Crusaders. He simply needed to contain them until exhaustion and attrition did the work. His Janissaries would anchor the center while Sipahi cavalry harassed the flanks, drawing the Crusader knights into premature charges that would shatter their formation. Then, with European cohesion broken, the Ottoman numerical superiority would become decisive. As dawn broke on November 10, 1444, both armies completed their deployments. The young king donned his armor and took his position with the royal guard. Hunyadi offered one final counsel, urging patience and discipline. Within hours, one of these armies would cease to exist. The battle opened not with cavalry charges, but with artillery. Ottoman cannons, primitive by later standards but psychologically devastating, began lobbing stone projectiles toward the Crusader lines. The effect was more thunder than destruction, but it served Murad's purpose, testing Crusader resolve while his Sipahi cavalry moved into flanking positions. The Crusaders, lacking significant artillery, could only endure the bombardment and watch Ottoman horsemen swirl across the battlefield like iron filings responding to a magnet. Janos Hunyadi struck first. Recognizing that passivity would allow the Ottomans to completely dictate terms of engagement, he launched his right wing in a calculated assault against the Ottoman left flank. His Wallachian cavalry, experts in the mobile warfare that had bloodied Ottoman armies during the long campaign, crashed into the Anatolian Sipahis with controlled fury. This wasn't the desperate charge of cornered men. This was Hunyadi applying the tactical lessons of a dozen victories. For a critical hour, the maneuver succeeded brilliantly. The Ottoman left wing buckled under the ferocity of Hunyadi's assault. His hussars, lighter and more maneuverable than traditional knights, exploited gaps in the Ottoman formation with disciplined precision. Sipahis, accustomed to fighting less organized opponents, found themselves outmaneuvered by European cavalry employing their own fluid tactics. Panic rippled through the Ottoman flank. Elements began withdrawing in disorder, and for a moment the impossible seemed possible. Hunyadi was rolling up Murad's line. The Sultan, observing from his command position behind the Janissary center, remained calm. This was the moment he had anticipated. Rather than commit his reserves to shore up the crumbling left wing, Murad ordered his right-wing commander, Karaka Pasha, to intensify pressure on the Crusader left. Simultaneously, he pulled his left wing back in a controlled fighting retreat, drawing Hunyadi's forces further away from the main Crusader position. It was a tactical vice closing from both directions. On the Crusader left wing, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The mixed force of Bohemian infantry and lesser nobility, competent but lacking the leadership genius of Hunyadi, found themselves overwhelmed by wave after wave of Ottoman cavalry. Karaka Pasha's Sipahis, employing the classic nomadic tactic of feigned retreat followed by sudden counterattack, shredded Crusader cohesion. Arrows darkened the sky. Men in partial armor fell screaming, shafts piercing gaps at joints and necks. The left wing didn't break in a single catastrophic moment. It eroded, unit by unit, like a sand castle before an incoming tide. In the center, King Władysław watched both flanks engaged in desperate combat, while his own powerful force of royal knights remained stationary. This was sound military doctrine. The reserve commits only at the decisive moment. But Władysław was 20 years old, a king who had inherited crowns as a child, and now commanded men 3 times his age. Around him, his Polish nobles grew restless. Their honor demanded action. Their heavily armored war horses stamped impatiently. Before them, perhaps 600 meters distant, flew the Sultan's personal standard, a massive banner marking Murad's command position behind the Janissary lines. Cardinal Cesarini, riding near the king, recognized the dangerous psychology developing. He urged caution, but his earlier rhetoric about divine favor had planted seeds that now bore bitter fruit. If God truly blessed their cause, shouldn't their king lead the charge? Shouldn't righteousness overcome numbers? What happened next remains one of the most debated moments in medieval military history. Did Władysław order the charge, or did his nobles initiate it and the king simply followed? Did Cardinal Cesarini encourage or attempt to prevent it? The sources offer conflicting accounts. What is certain is this. Approximately 3,000 Polish and Hungarian knights, the flower of Central European aristocracy, suddenly spurred their massive war horses forward in a headlong charge directly at the Ottoman center. The psychological impact was tremendous. 3,000 armored riders moving at full gallop generate a sound like continuous thunder. The ground shakes. Even disciplined troops feel primal terror at such a sight. The Janissaries, positioned behind their wagon fortifications, held their fire until the charge closed to approximately 100 meters, then unleashed a devastating volley of arrows and arquebus fire. Medieval plate armor, masterfully crafted by European armorers, proved its worth. The majority of projectiles deflected harmlessly or failed to penetrate. The charge didn't falter, it accelerated. The knights crashed into the Janissary position with apocalyptic force, their momentum carrying them through the first defensive line. Wagons splintered. Ottoman soldiers, elite though they were, found themselves trampled or impaled on the long lances of Polish cavalry. For several chaotic minutes, the charge seemed to justify every romantic notion of knightly invincibility. They were within meters of the Sultan's position when everything collapsed. Murad had positioned his personal guard, veteran Sipahis and elite infantry, in a dense formation surrounding his standard. As the Crusader charge exhausted its momentum against this final barrier, Ottoman forces that had parted before the initial assault now closed behind it. The knights found themselves surrounded deep within enemy lines, their horses blown from the extended charge. What had been an unstoppable offensive became a desperate struggle for survival. King Władysław III of Poland and Hungary, his royal armor marking him as clearly as any banner, fought with the courage expected of medieval kingship. Sources describe him cutting down multiple opponents with his sword, refusing calls to retreat. But courage cannot overcome mathematics. Ottoman warriors, recognizing the significance of his armor and position, converged from all directions. The exact moment of his death is lost to history. Some accounts claim decapitation, others that he was pulled from his horse and killed in the resulting melee. What matters is the result. The 20-year-old king died in the mud of Varna, surrounded by the bodies of his nobles, within sight of the enemy standard he had sought to capture. When news of the king's death spread through the Crusader army, cohesion evaporated. On the right wing, János Hunyadi, who had successfully routed his opposing force and was preparing to pivot toward the Ottoman center, suddenly faced an impossible situation. With no king, no central command, and Ottoman forces now free to concentrate against him, continuation meant annihilation. Demonstrating the military genius that had made him legendary, Hunyadi executed a fighting withdrawal, extracting the remnants of his wing from the battlefield while covering the escape of what few Crusader units remained intact. The Battle of Varna was over. The slaughter was just beginning. Ottoman cavalry pursued the fleeing Crusaders for miles, cutting down exhausted men who had marched 2 months to reach this killing field. Casualty figures vary by source, but modern historians estimate that the Crusader army lost between 12,000 and 15,000 men, potentially 3/4 of their entire force. The flower of Polish and Hungarian nobility died on that November day, creating a leadership vacuum that would plague both kingdoms for decades. Cardinal Julian Cesarini, the papal legate whose rhetoric had helped push Władysław toward breaking the treaty, was killed during the retreat, his body later discovered by Ottoman soldiers. Sultan Murad II ordered his soldiers to search the battlefield for the Polish king's body. When Władysław's corpse was identified, Murad had the young king's head removed and preserved in honey, then sent to various Ottoman territories as proof of victory. This gruesome trophy served both as propaganda and warning, breaking faith with the Sultan. The strategic ramifications were catastrophic for Christian Europe. The Hungarian kingdom, having lost its king and much of its military elite, descended into a succession crisis. Poland similarly faced political instability, eventually entering a personal union with Lithuania that would reshape Central European politics for centuries. The crusading spirit that had briefly flourished after Hunyadi's victories in 1443 died at Varna, never to be meaningfully revived. For the Ottoman Empire, Varna represented validation. Western Europe's greatest military effort in a generation, blessed by the Pope, led by a king, commanded by their most successful general, had been decisively crushed. The aura of Ottoman invincibility, briefly questioned during Hunyadi's long campaign, was restored and strengthened. The message was clear. No Christian coalition could prevent Ottoman expansion. 9 years later, in 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, that 12-year-old boy who briefly held the throne while his father was in retirement, conquered Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire after over 1,000 years of existence. The Venetian fleet that might have supported the Crusaders at Varna never arrived. By 1453, Venetian priorities had shifted to negotiating favorable trade terms with the inevitable Ottoman conquerors. The trajectory that became irreversible at Varna reached its logical conclusion when the greatest city in Christendom fell. János Hunyadi survived Varna, returning to a hero's welcome despite the disaster. He would continue fighting the Ottomans for another 12 years, achieving a final spectacular victory at Belgrade in 1456 that temporarily halted Ottoman expansion northward. But he never commanded a force comparable to what was destroyed at Varna. That opportunity died with a 20-year-old king who charged when he should have waited. The Battle of Varna has been extensively documented by both European and Ottoman chroniclers, though their accounts naturally differ in emphasis and detail. The Polish chronicler Jan Długosz, writing in the late 15th century, provides the most comprehensive Western account, including casualty figures and detailed descriptions of the king's final charge. His work, while valuable, reflects the natural bias of a writer mourning his nation's catastrophic loss. Ottoman sources, particularly the chronicles of Ashik-Pashazadeh and Neshri, offer complementary perspectives that emphasize Sultan Murad's strategic brilliance and the divine justice of victory against oath-breakers. Modern historians like John Jefferson, whose book The Holy Wars of King Władysław and Sultan Murad provides exhaustive analysis of the campaign, and Colin Imber, whose scholarship on early Ottoman military organization remains definitive, have worked to reconcile these competing narratives. According to Jefferson's research, the decision to charge was likely spontaneous rather than planned, emerging from the volatile combination of youthful kingship, aristocratic honor culture, and the desperate recognition that tactical stalemate favored the numerically superior Ottomans. The battlefield itself, located near modern-day Varna in Bulgaria, features a memorial monument erected in 1924 commemorating the 480th anniversary of the battle. Archaeological work in the region has uncovered mass graves containing remains consistent with 15th century military equipment, providing physical evidence of the slaughter described in written sources. What makes Varna historically significant beyond the immediate military outcome is what it represented: the last serious attempt by unified Christian kingdoms to reverse Ottoman expansion through direct confrontation. After 1444, European strategy shifted toward containment, fortification, and eventually, accommodation. The crusading ideal that faith and righteousness could overcome material disadvantages died in the mud alongside King Władysław. If you found this exploration of medieval military catastrophe fascinating, the strategic decisions that led to Varna's disaster offer lessons that resonate far beyond the 15th century. The interplay of religious fervor, political ambition, and military reality created a perfect storm that consumed an army and changed the trajectory of civilizations. The next chapter in this story, the fall of Constantinople 9 years later, was written in the blood spilled on this Bulgarian plateau. Some defeats don't just lose battles, they lose worlds.